What really happens when we die? It is, without a doubt, one of the biggest questions we all ask. Well, today, we're diving into a perspective that claims that actually millions of people have been completely deceived on this very topic. We're unpacking one ministry's view, which is based on their interpretation of biblical prophecy, and let me tell you, it offers a pretty different picture of the afterlife than you might be used to. So let's just start with the main question they're asking. What if everything we think we know about death, ghosts, spirits, immediately going to heaven or hell, what if it's all part of a huge, elaborate deception? According to this ministry, what you believe about death isn't just a side issue. It's absolutely central to understanding what they call end-time events.
So, here's what we're going to tackle in this explainer. We're going to break down their theological answers to a few key questions. First, what exactly is a soul? Then, is it even possible to talk to the dead? After that, when do people actually go to heaven or hell? And finally, the big one, when do we get immortality? So, let's start at the very beginning with the soul itself. All right, first up, and this is a big one, our source material goes right up against the belief that is, well, it's almost universal. They argue that this whole idea of an immortal soul, a conscious part of you that just floats on after your body dies, is a complete misunderstanding of the Bible.
The entire foundation for their argument really hinges on this one verse from Genesis. The way they see it, this verse isn't saying God gave man a soul. No, it's saying man became a soul. It's like a divine formula.
So here's the key takeaway from their interpretation. A soul isn't some ghost in the machine that's living inside of you. It's what you are when you combine two things, a body, made from the dust of the ground, and the breath of life, which comes from God. So, body plus breath equals a living soul. And to make this really clear, they use a great analogy, a light bulb. Think about it. Light isn't just sitting inside the bulb waiting to get out. It only exists when you combine the bulb with electricity. The moment you cut the power, where does the light go? It doesn't go anywhere, right? It just ceases to exist. They say it's the exact same with the soul. When death happens, the breath of life goes back to God, and the soul, that conscious, living being, it just stops existing. So the bottom line for this first part is pretty stark. According to this viewpoint, the soul is not immortal. It doesn't live on. It actually dies. And they point to other scriptures that back this up, like a verse in Ezekiel that says, point blank, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. Okay, so if a soul ceases to exist when you die, that leads to a pretty obvious next question, doesn't it? What is the actual state of the dead? Well, according to this source material, it's a state of total, complete unconsciousness.
And the main piece of evidence they present for this is a passage from Ecclesiastes. And I mean, it is incredibly direct. The dead know nothing. All their thoughts, their feelings, love, hate, envy, it says, it has all perished. They have no more awareness of what's happening here on earth.
Now this leads to a really important conclusion, because if the dead know absolutely nothing, if they have no part in anything that happens under the sun, then things like seances or trying to communicate with them, it's just impossible. They can't hear you. They can't talk back.
Okay, so if people aren't talking to their deceased loved ones, who exactly are they talking to? The source has an answer for that. They identify these beings as familiar spirits, which they say are demonic entities who were, well, familiar with a person while they were alive. They watch them so closely that they can impersonate them perfectly, mimicking their voice, their personality, even revealing secrets only they would know. And this is presented as a really serious spiritual danger.
The source then sort of lays out this historical trail, tracing this whole belief in an immortal soul, all the way back to what they call Satan's very first lie in the Garden of Eden, ye shall not surely die. They argue this idea then trickled down through ancient Egypt, influencing their complex burial rituals, got picked up by famous Greek and Roman philosophers, and eventually was absorbed right into mainstream Christian belief during the Middle Ages.
So you see how this all builds on itself, right? If the dead are totally unconscious in the grave, then it follows that they can't be in heaven praising God or in hell being punished. At least, not yet.
And to back this up, they point to a couple of really interesting verses. First is Psalm that says flat out, the dead praise not the Lord, which you'd think they'd be doing in heaven. But the second one is even more direct. It's from the book of Acts, and it says that even King David, a man described as being after God's own heart, has not ascended into the heavens.
But I know what you might be thinking right now. What about the thief on the cross? Didn't Jesus say to him, "Today shalt thou be with me in paradise"? That sounds pretty immediate, right? So how does this viewpoint handle that apparent contradiction?
Well, what's really fascinating here is that their entire explanation comes down to a single comma. Seriously. They point out that the original Greek manuscripts didn't have any punctuation, no commas, no periods. So they argue that if you just move the comma one word over, the meaning completely changes. It's no longer a promise fulfilled today, but a promise being made today. I'm telling you today, you will be with me in paradise.
And the reason they argue for this reading is all about making the scriptures consistent. Think about it. A few days after his resurrection, Jesus tells Mary Magdalene that he had not yet ascended to the Father. So the critical point is, how could Jesus have been with the thief in paradise on Friday if he himself hadn't even gone there by Sunday morning?
Okay, so if the dead aren't in heaven, they're not in hell, and their soul doesn't live on, where are they? And what's that state actually like? Well, the source says the Bible provides a simple, consistent metaphor to explain it.
You might be surprised to hear this, but they claim that over 50 times the Bible refers to death as a sleep. The most famous example, of course, is the story of Lazarus. Jesus tells his disciples, "Our friend Lazarus sleepeth," and then when they get confused, he has to clarify for them, "Lazarus is dead."
And this illustrates the idea perfectly. Now, it's not a literal sleep with dreams and all that. It's a powerful metaphor for a temporary, totally unconscious state of rest. They're just resting in the grave, waiting for a future wake-up call.
And this brings us to the final, and really the most hopeful piece of this whole framework. When does that wake-up call finally happen? It's all tied to an event that this source calls the blessed hope.
So, according to their reading of prophecy, the second coming follows a clear sequence. First, there's a shout as the Lord descends from heaven. Then, the righteous dead, the ones who have been sleeping in Christ, are resurrected from their graves. And finally, they, along with the righteous people who are still alive, are all gathered up together to meet Jesus in the air.
And this right here, this is the pivotal moment. According to this passage in 1 Corinthians, immortality is not something we already have. It is a gift. And it's given at a very specific time, at the last trump, when the dead are raised from the grave. It is then, and only then, that this mortal body finally puts on immortality.
So when you put all these pieces together, you get a theological framework where death is an unconscious sleep, the soul isn't naturally immortal, and the mortality itself is a gift that's only given at the resurrection. And this leaves us with one final question to think about. How does this view completely challenge all the common stories we hear in our culture about ghosts, spirits, and making an immediate trip to the other side? It's a perspective that really aims to redefine life, death, and everything that comes after.